morals. They believed that how you lived your life here determined what would happen in the afterlife. And they lived their life according to that. Even the pharaohs were subject to that rule. But the Egyptians included into all of their worship everything. Fish, catching of fish, to architecture, to art. Everything was a religious issue for them, especially architecture. And this is the Temple of Karnak. This temple took 1,000 years to build. The pharaohs just kept building on and on and on. This, of course, is the famous pyramid and the Sphinx. All of this was dedicated to the gods that they worshiped. They were deeply involved in architecture. Okay, but all of their architecture was part of their religion, and they invented architecture. The Egyptians invented the column, the dome, and the arch. And you could not become an architect in Egypt unless you were initiated into higher degrees of consciousness through special initiations. You could not receive the knowledge of how to build unless you were initiated into it. And that's how the priesthood worked. Now, let me tell you about the initiation rites for just a minute, because this is very profound. When Nimrod died, so the legend goes from the ancient historians, and I'll tell you about how it's interpreted through Egyptian lore. His wife, whose name was Semiramis, went looking for him. He allegedly was killed by his brother. Okay? His brother killed him. He was jealous of his power, and he killed him. He was put into a sarcophagus, put on the boat, and his wife, Semiramis, went looking for him. She found him. He had been cut in pieces, dismembered by his brother. Now, this is the legend part of it. His wife found him cut into these 14 pieces, and she reassembled him, and he resurrected. But there was one part of his body that she couldn't find, his genitals. This is true. And in Egyptian religion, the name Nimrod is synonymous with Osiris. And his wife's name, Semiramis, is synonymous with Isis. So Nimrod in Egypt is Osiris, and his wife, Semiramis, is Isis. Okay? And as we study through their terminology in the hieroglyphics, this legend is explained in the Valley of the Kings. And Osiris becomes, in their legend, the god of the dead. And his son, who's born later, Horus, who is the other patron god, is the god of the sun. So Osiris, god of the dead, Horus, god of the living. Now, if you were somebody that helped build the pyramids, the idea was if you did a good job for Pharaoh, Pharaoh on earth was like Horus. He was the offspring of Horus in their belief. So if you did a good job building the pyramid, then Pharaoh might put in a good word for you to Osiris. And in every single situation, in every cave I visited, all the faces of the Egyptians were sad when they visited Osiris, because none of them did good enough work to warrant the afterlife. It was a works religion in a pagan form. Unbelievable. But back to this, the genitals part. I know, but you got to hear this. It's pretty amazing. The essence of Osiris, or Nimrod, was memorialized in what is called obelisks. I want you to see this. The Egyptian obelisk is the memorialization of the essence of Osiris. The idea being, there you see in the Temple of Karnak, an obelisk. The idea being that through him, through his progeny, would be how the world would be settled and civilized. It would be through his seed. So he was memorialized, the essence of Osiris was memorialized by the obelisk. Now, think about that. And there's Ken walking there in 115-degree heat. There's another obelisk that you see there. Essence of Osiris, a very significant part of the Egyptian religion coming from Mystery Babylon. Okay, we want to go right away, David, to the next cut. And I want you to see if you recognize the location of where this obelisk is. This one was taken from the temple of Karnak and Luxor and transported to all places. Look on top, and what do you see? A cross. What do you know? A cross on top of the essence of Osiris. Now, I've got to tell you something. This is a huge problem for Jews, because they were there in bondage building these things, and they knew what they represented. That's Vatican City, and there in the St. Peter's Square, an obelisk, the essence of Osiris, with a cross. Christianized paganism. Now let's show them the last one. This is really cute. The Washington Monument, an Egyptian obelisk. Mystery Babylon, mother of harlots. Okay. Actually, Washington, D.C. is all laid out in Masonic symbols. The whole construction of the city is in a Masonic sign. God had a huge statement to make about this. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai, right? Remember the story. Everybody, you all know the story. And there he gets the tablets. Oh, actually, before the tablets, he goes up there, and the Lord says, no, I want you to go down. I want you to have a nice chat with Pharaoh. So he goes, oh, okay, I can't talk too well. He says, I'll take care of that too. And as Moses leaves Sinai, God says, I'm going to kill you, Moses. I'm going to kill you. Maybe you know this. God was going to kill Moses. And the reason for it is because Moses didn't have his son's genitals circumcised. And God is saying, you ain't going down there to this man that claims that through his sexual organ the world is going to be conquered. I'm telling you that I'm going to bring it on through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I'm going to leave a sign in the flesh as a perpetual covenant. And so before you go down there, you better take care of your family, because they're out of order with that covenant. And so circumcision was a direct rebuke. God says, I have a special people whom that's coming through. Abraham, the father of faith, they're my people, not you, not the people of Babylon. They ain't coming through that. Well, as the need for architecture grew, the Egyptians fanned out, and they began to teach other nations about how to build. But in order to be one that was initiated into the architectural understanding, you had to be initiated into it through secret rites. Now, I want to take you with one thought for a minute to Greece. As the Greeks were initiated into the mysteries of Nimrod and the Egyptian legend, some of the men at that time advanced on the concept of how the spiritual world worked. One of them was Plato. Plato was probably one of the most influential men that ever lived. And he believed and taught that the spiritual world was the perfect world. It was perfect. Things existed in an unseen world. He had some Christian theology going for him there. And the material world, matter, was evil. The spiritual world good, the material world evil. And this view was the prevailing view of the spiritual world up to the time of the birth of the Lord and afterwards. And I'm going to come back to the importance of this in just a minute. But before I do, I want to take you to the time of Christ and talk to you about how the legend of Nimrod entered into the gospel and how in many respects perverted most of Europe, so that you can see the influence of Mystery Babylon throughout the last 2,000 years. I want you to turn with me to Matthew 28, and I want to talk to you about the spread of this perversion into the gospel. These aren't mine. Oh. Whoever wears these is really blind. Man. Well, I thought I needed a healing. As the mystery of iniquity, the mystery of Mystery Babylon filtered down through the Old Testament world, and the initiation processes of Osiris and Isis, i.e. Nimrod and Semiramis, It flowed into the Roman Empire from the Greek Empire. 300 years before Rome hit its stride and the city was being constructed, and when it was just a baby city, little town. The people of the city were fearful that should that hill that I showed you, and let me, don't roll it yet. Don't roll it quite yet. I got another shot I want to show you. But the people of the city were afraid that marauding bands and invaders would take that hill, that Giacola hill that we looked out from over and looked over. They were afraid that they'd take that hill and then could attack down into the city. That would be a strategic military high ground. And so what they did was they appointed some men to build a bridge over the river, the Tiber River. There's the bridge right about where now that isn't the original bridge, but that's where about the bridge was. And that bridge connected downtown Rome across the river to the Giacola Hill. Okay? We have another shot of it from a distance. And they appointed these men to not only build the bridge, so they had to be architects and engineers, and they had to be trained in the Egyptian architectural initiation. And they were also military men. And they were commissioned to not only build the bridge, but to maintain the bridge and to protect the bridge, so that in the event that somebody would come and take that hill or try to, they could quickly get across the bridge and defend that hill so that they wouldn't be invaded. So these men that did that were priests. They had to be priests because, remember, Egypt initiated them into the priesthood. They had to be priests. And these men were called, you're going to die when you hear this, pontiffs. The word pontiff, you know what the word pontoon is? It's a little dealie under the mobile plane. It means bridge builder. This priestly class were called pontiffs, bridge builders. And the head priest over those men was called the Pontiff Maximus. And the very Catholic Church, the Pope, took his name from these Egyptian-trained architects. So if you want to know the history and how the Egyptian and paganism of the Catholic Church evolved, you can see it coming down through time, through the Egyptians, through the Greeks, into the Roman era, and then insinuating itself somewhat into the Catholic Church. And now you see in St. Peter's Square the obelisk of Osiris, Christianized by a cross, which, like I said before, is a huge problem for Jewish people to understand how they could take Pharaoh and, at least I should say Osiris, and make him out to be some kind of Christian. It's a big problem. It's a big theological problem. But the spread of these mysteries didn't confine itself just to the Catholic Church. It was bigger than that. I want you to come with me to Matthew 28, because remember, peoples, nations, multitudes, and tongues. Mystery Babylon is bigger than just its effect on the Christian world. It goes into Islam. It goes into all the religions of the world. But let's talk about how it affected a little bit more, kind of the perversion of the gospel. Matthew 28. Let's start in 12. And when they had assembled with the elders and counseled together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers. Remember, Jesus died, he rose again, and now the Jews are really nervous. They're going, oh man, if this gets out, this thing's going to be explosive. So we're going to pay off the soldiers. We're going to give them money to tell them this. And this is what they said. Say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep.
The blasphemous legend took root here at the tomb of Jesus, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew 28, where Roman soldiers took bribe money from the Jewish Sanhedrin, agreeing to spread the fallacious story that Jesus recovered from the wounds of the cross and left with his disciples. And it was this episode at the Garden Tomb that was the launching pad of the Holy Grail legend.
Now, the Gospel of Matthew wasn't written for 30 to 40 years after this event. So the story that went out was Jesus, it became a common story. Jesus really didn't die, he recovered. And his disciples came, and who was there first? Mary Magdalene. And sequestered him away. Now, this became a very important story to a certain group of people that had a tremendous problem with the Christian idea that God could incarnate. Remember Plato? The spiritual world is a good world. The material world is an evil world. The Greek mind couldn't fathom the idea that God, who is good and holy, would ever come down here and become a man. Why would he do that? It doesn't sync with our concept of the spiritual world. The Greek mind had a theological problem. Now here was coming the solution. And this is how it went, something like this. Well, Jesus wasn't really the Son of God. Remember it says anybody that denies that Christ has come in the flesh is what? Hello? Antichrist. But he was fulfilling the legend of Nimrod. His wife, and the story goes on to say that later Jesus and Mary Magdalene married. This is a blasphemous legend. And they had children. So Jesus was just like the avatar of the time. He was just a perfect fulfillment of the mysticism and the initiation rites. He was living out the actual legend of Nimrod or Osiris. And now they had a way to explain away the incarnation. And here's how the rest of the story went. Jesus, now of course it's a blasphemy, but this has hung over Europe for 2,000 years. Now Europe is the cradle of, well, Greece is, but Europe is the bastion of Western civilization. This is what's infected the spiritual fiber of the gospel. Here's how the story went. Jesus and Mary left, fulfilling the ancient initiation rites of Nimrod or Osiris. She was kind of like the Isis or the Semiramis in the story. They had children. They moved to France. Centuries went by, and a man rose up who became king of France. His name was Meravi, King Meravi of France. And he claimed to be a descendant of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And he set up, and so the Merovingian lineage is deep in the history of Europe because they then married into the Habsburg family. But let me stay with this thought. The descendants of Meravi who claimed this royal blood set up a secret society called the Priori de Sion, S-I-O-N. The Priori de Sion was an organization committed to keeping one of the offspring of Jesus and Mary on one of the thrones of Europe so that eventually they could become the beneficiary of the King of Jerusalem. The rightful heir, because they recognized that Jesus was a descendant. They read the genealogies. He was from a line of kings, and anybody that would come from him would be the rightful legal heir to the throne. This is where the Antichrist will come from, folks, so keep watching. About the 10th century, the Priori de Sion said, you know what, we need to take over Jerusalem because it was controlled by the Arabs. We're going to launch some crusades. And they funded and were behind the crusades that started in 1095 or so. And one of the leaders of the crusades was a man named Godefroy de Bouillon. Bullion, you recognize the word bullion, gold bullion. That's where it came from. It came from this guy, Bullion. Bullion's gold. He evidently discovered the gold on Mount Moriah there where they evidently hid probably the Ark of the Covenant and all the gold finery of the temple. They discover it. And those people were called the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar was the military arm of the Priori de Sion. And they were also not only the protectors of Jerusalem, they were the guardians of the Grail legend. You've seen it in Indiana Jones movies and throughout time, and Hitler this and all that, and this strange idea that the goblet that Jesus served communion in on the Last Supper, Joseph of Arimathea caught his blood as it came out of the body of Christ. And like insanity. But the truth of the Grail legend has nothing to do with the goblet. It has to do with the blood line of the Merovingians. The guardians of the Grail are the guardians of those that have the bloodline from Meravi, who claimed to be a descendant of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. That's why many people think King Juan Carlos of Spain, the Habsburg family, or possibly Prince Charles may be the Antichrist. The Knights Templar took over Jerusalem for 200 years. Christendom, it wasn't Christendom, because these people were all caught up in the ancient mysteries of Egypt, controlled Jerusalem until, I believe it was Saladin came and liberated Jerusalem, and then the Arabs took over for quite a period of time. The Knights Templar were pushed out in about the 13th century. They came under attack, and then the Catholic Church destroyed them or denounced them. They went underground, and they became known in secret as the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians took that name because Maravi in the 5th century had a birthmark over his heart in the form of a cross, a red cross. In fact, the Hospitallers, who lived at the same time as the Templars, also took as their insignia the Red Cross. It's where the Red Cross comes from today, is from the Hospitallers who lived concurrently with the Knights Templar that were there to set up hospitals for the pilgrims that would come back to Jerusalem to worship. That's where they came from. But when the Knights Templar went underground, the Hospitallers were the beneficiary of all the lands and wealth they conquered. They hid it like it was like a trust, a living trust. But they became known as the Rosicrucians. They continued on with the same initiation. Their headquarters are in the United States or in Oceanside. It's like heavy demonic. You go in there and you feel like the air. You can't even breathe it. It's like terrible feeling in there.
While the Templars and the Rosicrucians were outwardly visible, the Priori de Sion functioned secretly.